I woke up at dawn to the rumble of a cement mixer, which was strange because I hadn't ordered one. And when I looked out my bedroom window toward my stock pond, my blood ran cold at the sight of 3 trucks surrounding my water source with hoses aimed directly at it. I threw on my jeans and boots so fast I nearly tripped down the stairs. My name is Connor Vaughn, and I own a 40-acre ranch just outside Stillwater, Oklahoma, where I raise cattle and a small herd of goats. That stock pond was the lifeblood of my operation, fed by a natural spring and carefully maintained for the past 15 years since I inherited this property from my grandfather. Without it, my animals had nowhere to drink during the hot Oklahoma summers. By the time I burst through my front door, they were already pumping concrete into the water. A woman in a pristine white pantsuit stood beside the lead truck, clipboard in hand, her bleached blonde hair sprayed into an immovable helmet despite the morning breeze. I recognized her immediately as Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Prairie Vista Homeowners Association, though my property predated their development by about 70 years. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward the pond. The workers looked up nervously, but Patricia held up one manicured hand like a traffic cop. "Mr. Vaughn, please maintain a civil distance," she said in that condescending tone I'd come to despise over the past 2 years since the development went up on the adjacent property. "We're simply enforcing HOA regulations regarding standing water and mosquito breeding grounds. This isn't HOA property." I was practically shaking with rage. The concrete was already flowing into my pond, turning the clear spring water into a gray, churning mess. My cattle were gathered at the far end, confused and agitated. "You're on my land, destroying my livestock's water supply." Patricia adjusted her designer sunglasses and consulted her clipboard. "According to our survey, this pond extends into HOA jurisdiction by approximately 15 feet. The board voted unanimously last week to address the mosquito problem. Your survey is wrong and you know it." I moved to grab the hose, but 2 of the workers stepped between us. They looked uncomfortable, like they knew this was wrong but were just following orders. "Stop this right now, or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We have all the proper permits. The county approved our mosquito abatement project." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but even as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I watched helplessly as thousands of gallons of concrete poured into my pond. The dispatcher said an officer would be out within the hour, but by then, it would be too late. I stood there feeling powerless, watching decades of careful land stewardship destroyed in minutes. The concrete kept flowing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I called my neighbor, Dutch Morrison, who'd helped me with the cattle drives every fall. He answered on the second ring. "Dutch, I need you to bring your water truck to my place right now," I said urgently. "The HOA is filling my stock pond with concrete. My animals are going to be without water." "They're doing what?" Dutch's voice rose in disbelief. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Next, I called the one person I knew could actually help me fight this legally. Rebecca Harding was a livestock attorney based in Oklahoma City, specializing in agricultural law and property rights. I'd met her at a Cattlemen's Association meeting 3 years ago, and she'd given me her card, telling me to call if I ever had trouble with the expanding developments around my property. "Rebecca Harding," she answered, her voice professional but friendly. "Miss Harding, this is Connor Vaughn from Stillwater. We met at the Cattlemen's Association meeting in 2023. I have an emergency situation here." I explained everything as quickly as I could while watching the concrete continue to pour. Rebecca listened without interrupting, but I could hear her typing rapidly in the background. "Connor, listen to me very carefully," she said when I finished. "Don't let them leave that property. Keep them there however you can without physically restraining anyone. I'm looking at property records right now, and unless something has drastically changed, that pond is entirely on your deeded land. What they're doing is criminal property destruction, possible livestock endangerment, and a whole list of other charges. I'm filing an emergency petition with the district court right now, and I'll have law enforcement out there within the hour with proper documentation. They said they have permits from the county for work on your private property without your permission. Impossible. They're lying or they committed fraud to obtain those permits. Either way, they're in serious trouble. I'm on my way. Should be there in 45 minutes. Do not sign anything, do not agree to anything, and document everything with photos and video." I started recording everything on my phone. The cement trucks, the workers, Patricia standing there like she owned the place. She noticed me filming and walked over with that same condescending smile. "Recording won't help you, Mr. Vaughn. This is all completely legal." "We'll see about that," I said, keeping the camera steady on her face. "State your name for the record." "Patricia Ann Hendricks, president of Prairie Vista HOA, and I'm not intimidated by your little video." "Good. Then you won't mind stating clearly that you ordered concrete to be poured into my stock pond without my permission." Her smile faltered just slightly. "We're addressing a community health concern regarding mosquito breeding grounds that affect all Prairie Vista residents." "On property you don't own. The survey clearly shows your fraudulent survey," I interrupted. "My attorney is already filing charges. She'll be here within the hour." That got her attention. Patricia's face went pale under her heavy makeup. She turned to the workers. "How much longer?" "Another 15 minutes to empty all 3 trucks, madam," one of them called back. "Finish the job," she ordered, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. A sheriff's deputy arrived about 10 minutes later, a young guy named Martinez who looked barely old enough to be out of the academy. He took down information from both of us, examined Patricia's so-called permits, and walked the property line with the deed description I pulled up on my phone. "Madam, this pond appears to be entirely on Mr. Vaughn's property," Deputy Martinez said after comparing the legal description to the actual land. "These permits don't give you authorization to work on private property without the owner's consent. The HOA survey clearly indicates your survey doesn't supersede the legal property description filed with the county," the deputy said firmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to cease work immediately." But it was too late. The trucks were empty and my pond was filled with wet concrete. The damage was done. My cattle were milling around nervously, already looking for water. Dutch arrived with his water truck and immediately started filling the emergency troughs I kept for situations like equipment failures, though I'd never imagined I'd need them because someone deliberately destroyed my water source. "Connor, what the hell happened here?" Dutch was a big man in his 60s, weathered and tough from decades of ranching. He looked at the concrete-filled pond with pure shock. "HOA happened," I said bitterly. Rebecca Harding arrived about 20 minutes later, driving a silver pickup truck and dressed in jeans, boots, and a button-down shirt that somehow still looked professional. She was in her 40s, tall and lean with short brown hair and sharp eyes that took in the entire scene in seconds. She had a briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other, already talking to someone. "Yes, Judge Morrison, I'm on site right now. Criminal property destruction, livestock endangerment, possible fraud in obtaining permits, trespassing, and about 6 other charges I'm working up." I need an emergency order to preserve all evidence and prevent the defendants from disposing of any documents related to this incident." She listened for a moment, then smiled grimly. "Yes, Your Honor, I'll have it all documented within 2 hours. Thank you." Rebecca walked directly to the pond, took dozens of photos from every angle, then approached Patricia, who was now looking distinctly nervous and talking urgently on her own phone. "Patricia Hendricks," Rebecca asked, though she clearly knew the answer. "Who are you?" "Rebecca Harding, attorney representing Mr. Vaughn. I'm here to inform you that criminal charges are being filed against you personally, against the Prairie Vista HOA as an entity, and against anyone else involved in this incident. I've already spoken with Judge Morrison, and we're securing an emergency court order as we speak. We had permits." Patricia's voice was shrill now, the smooth confidence completely gone. "Show me." Patricia fumbled with her clipboard and handed over several documents. Rebecca examined them carefully, her expression growing darker. "These permits are for mosquito abatement work on HOA property, specifically addresses within the Prairie Vista development," Rebecca said slowly. "There's no mention of this address, no mention of any property outside the development boundaries, and certainly no authorization to work on privately owned agricultural land. Did you deliberately lie to the county when you obtained these permits, or did you simply decide to expand the scope without proper authorization? The pond affects our residents. That's not what I asked. Did you tell the county you would be working on Mr. Vaughn's property when you applied for these permits?" Patricia's silence was damning. "I'll take that as a no," Rebecca said. "Which means you not only committed criminal property destruction, but you also used fraudulently obtained permits to do it. That's multiple felony counts." "Now wait just a minute," Patricia sputtered. "This is a civil matter at most. The HOA will pay for a new water source. You destroyed a natural spring-fed pond that's been here for over a century," I interrupted, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "You can't just pay for a new one. That spring is gone. The water table in this area is the reason my grandfather chose this property. You've destroyed something irreplaceable." Rebecca put a hand on my shoulder. "Connor, let me handle this." She turned back to Patricia. "Here's what's going to happen. You and I are going to walk over to that deputy, and you're going to give a full statement about what occurred here today. Then you're going to provide the names of every HOA board member who voted for this action, every contractor who worked on this job, and every document related to this incident. After that, you're going to call your insurance company and your attorney because you're going to need both." "I don't have to talk to you," Patricia said, but she was backing toward her car. "That's fine. You can talk to the district attorney instead. I'm sure they'll be very interested in this case." Rebecca pulled out her phone again. "I have the DA's direct line. Scott Patterson and I went to law school together. You're bluffing." Rebecca hit dial and put the phone on speaker. After 2 rings, a man's voice answered. "Rebecca Harding." This better be good for a Saturday morning call. "Scott, I'm at a property in Stillwater where an HOA just filled a rancher's stock pond with concrete, using fraudulently obtained permits without the property owner's permission, endangering livestock in the process. I have the HOA president on site and she's refusing to cooperate. I think this needs criminal prosecution, not just civil action." There was a pause. "You're serious?" "Completely. I have photos, video, witnesses, and the HOA president right here. Don't let anyone leave. I'm sending investigators out right now. Should be there in 30 minutes. Patricia's face went from pale to gray. She looked at the deputy, who had been listening to the entire conversation. "I want to make a statement," she said quickly. "I want it on record that the HOA board voted on this, not just me. This wasn't my decision alone. "Oh, you'll all be held accountable," Rebecca assured her. "But you're the one who stood here and watched it happen, so you get to be first." Over the next hour, 2 investigators from the district attorney's office arrived, along with a county surveyor who confirmed what we already knew. My pond was entirely on my property, nowhere near the HOA boundaries. Patricia sat in her car, making phone calls and looking increasingly desperate. The cement truck drivers were questioned separately and admitted they'd had concerns about the location but were assured by Patricia that all the permits were in order. "We're just contractors," one of them said nervously. "She hired us for a mosquito abatement job. We didn't know it was someone's private property." Rebecca was taking extensive notes and photos, documenting everything. Dutch had filled all my emergency troughs, but we both knew it was a temporary solution. I had 30 head of cattle and about 2 dozen goats. They needed a constant water supply, especially as we moved into summer. "Connor, we need to talk about immediate solutions and long-term legal strategy," Rebecca said, pulling me aside. "First, your animals. How long can the emergency trough sustain them?" "A few days, maybe a week if we're careful and Dutch can keep bringing water. But it's not sustainable. I'll have to start hauling water or drill a new well, and that's expensive. My operation runs on pretty thin margins as it is. Document every expense. Every gallon of water, every hour of labor, every cost associated with this incident. It's all going to be part of the damages claim. Second, I'm filing both criminal and civil actions. The criminal case will be the DA's to prosecute, but we're also suing the HOA, Patricia personally, and every board member who voted for this. We're going for full damages, punitive damages, legal fees, and an order requiring them to restore your property to its original condition." "Can they even do that? The spring is gone." "We'll hire hydrologists to assess whether the spring can be recovered. If not, they'll pay for a well system that matches or exceeds the capacity of what you lost. They'll also pay for every gallon of water you have to haul until then. This is going to cost them a fortune." "Good," I said flatly. I wasn't usually a vindictive person, but watching my pond disappear under concrete had ignited something fierce in me. That pond was part of my family's legacy, part of what made this land viable for ranching. Patricia and her HOA had destroyed it like it was nothing, like my livelihood didn't matter. By early afternoon, Patricia was arrested. The investigators determined that she had knowingly misrepresented the work location when obtaining the permits and had proceeded with the work, despite concerns raised by the contractors. She was charged with criminal mischief, fraud, property destruction, and livestock endangerment. The bail was set at $50,000. As the deputy led her to his car in handcuffs, Patricia looked at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "The HOA has lawyers too. You'll never win this." "We'll see," I said quietly. After she was gone, Rebecca sat down with me on my front porch. The sun was high now, and my animals were drinking from the troughs Dutch had filled. It looked normal enough, but I knew the disaster this represented. "Connor, I want to be straight with you about what comes next," Rebecca said. "This is going to be a fight. The HOA will claim they were acting in good faith on a boundary dispute. They'll minimize the damage. They'll try to settle for pennies on the dollar. We're going to have to prove every element of our case, and it's going to take time." "How much time?" "Criminal trial could be in 6 months. Civil case might take a year or more. But I'm going to push for an emergency hearing to get you immediate relief for the water situation. That should happen within a few weeks." "A few weeks?" I felt the stress settling into my shoulders. "I can't haul water for weeks. Dutch can help, and we'll bill the HOA for every cent. In fact, I'm going to file for a temporary restraining order requiring the HOA to pay for your water expenses immediately, pending the outcome of the case. Judge Morrison is sympathetic to agricultural issues. He grew up on a ranch himself. True to her word, Rebecca filed a motion that same evening. By Monday morning, we had an emergency hearing scheduled for Wednesday. In the meantime, I spent my days hauling water and watching my cattle eye the concrete-filled pond like they couldn't understand what had happened to their water source. I couldn't really explain it to them. Dutch came by every morning with his water truck, refusing to take payment. "You'll get your money from the HOA," he said firmly. "I'm not charging a neighbor for help in a crisis." But I documented his time anyway per Rebecca's instructions. Every hour, every gallon, every bit of diesel fuel he used, it was adding up fast. The emergency hearing on Wednesday was my first time in a courtroom, and it was intimidating. Judge Robert Morrison was a white-haired man in his 70s who ran his courtroom with quiet authority. Patricia was there with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. The HOA had clearly decided this was serious enough to bring in heavy firepower. Rebecca presented our case methodically. Photos of the pond before and after. The property survey showing the pond was entirely on my land. The permits Patricia had obtained that didn't mention my property. Testimony from the cement truck drivers. Documentation of my water costs over the past 3 days. Your Honor, Mr. Vaughn is facing a crisis entirely of the defendant's making, Rebecca argued. His cattle and goats require approximately 500 gallons of water per day. He's currently hauling that water at significant expense, while the defendants refuse to take any responsibility for their actions. We're asking for an emergency order requiring the defendants to pay for water delivery to Mr. Vaughn's property until this matter is resolved. The HOA's lead attorney, a slick-looking man named Marcus Webb, argued that the HOA was willing to negotiate a settlement but shouldn't be forced to pay anything until liability was determined. The boundary dispute is still unresolved, Your Honor. Until we determine whose property the pond was actually on. The county surveyor already determined that, Judge Morrison interrupted. I have his report right here. The pond is entirely on Mr. Vaughn's property. There is no boundary dispute. The HOA commissioned its own survey that shows differently, a survey that was never filed with the county and appears to have been created specifically to justify this action. The judge said dryly. Mr. Webb, your clients destroyed a rancher's water supply without permission and using fraudulent permits. The criminal charges are pending, but the civil liability is clear as day. I'm ordering the Prairie Vista HOA to pay for water delivery to Mr. Vaughn's property. 500 gallons per day minimum, until either the pond is restored or an equivalent water source is established. Payment to begin immediately. Next hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from today to assess progress on restoration. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but her lawyers quickly silenced her. As we filed out of the courtroom, Rebecca had a satisfied look on her face. That went better than expected, she said. Morrison didn't mess around. So they have to pay for my water now, starting today. I'll send them the bill for what you've spent so far too. They'll fight it, but the judge's order is clear. Over the next few weeks, an awkward system developed. The HOA hired a water delivery service to fill my troughs daily, but they made sure I knew they were unhappy about it. Patricia called me twice, trying to negotiate directly, but Rebecca had instructed me not to talk to any of them without her present. Meanwhile, Rebecca hired a hydrologist named Dr. Sarah Chen to assess the pond situation. Dr. Chen spent 3 days on my property, taking core samples, analyzing the concrete, and mapping the underground water flow. Her report, when it came, was devastating to the HOA's position. The spring that fed this pond was part of a natural aquifer system that's been active for thousands of years. Dr. Chen explained during a meeting in Rebecca's office. The concrete has blocked the spring outlet and disrupted the local water table. The spring water is now flowing elsewhere, likely flooding someone else's property or just dissipating underground. Removing the concrete and restoring the pond is possible, but it's going to be expensive and time-consuming. We're talking about excavation, careful concrete removal, re-establishing the spring outlet, and then waiting to see if the water flow returns to its original pattern. Cost estimate is around $300,000, and there's no guarantee of success. I felt sick. $300,000. That's the minimum, Dr. Chen said apologetically. If the spring doesn't return naturally after the concrete is removed, we'll need to redirect the flow, which could double the cost. The alternative is drilling a well, which would be cheaper but wouldn't restore the natural spring. Rebecca was making notes. The HOA is going to argue for the cheaper option. We need to push for full restoration because that's what Connor lost. The spring-fed pond had value beyond just the water supply. She was right. That pond had been part of the property's ecosystem. Wildlife used it. Fish lived in it. It wasn't just a water source, it was part of the land. The civil case officially began about 8 weeks after the incident. Discovery was intense. Rebecca subpoenaed all the HOA board meeting minutes, emails, and documents related to my property. What emerged was a disturbing pattern of harassment. The HOA had been trying to force me out for 2 years. They wanted my land for expansion of their development. Patricia had sent me dozens of violation notices for things that weren't actually violations. My barn was supposedly too tall. My fence was the wrong color. My cattle were too noisy. I'd ignored most of them because I knew the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. But the emails between HOA board members told a more sinister story. Patricia had written to the other board members multiple times about finding ways to force the ranch out. They discussed various strategies, including filing nuisance complaints with the county, pressuring my neighbors to complain, and finding code violations. The pond plan had been Patricia's idea specifically. In an email dated 3 weeks before the incident, she'd written, "If we eliminate the water source, he'll have to sell. No rancher can operate without water." Rebecca entered that email into evidence with barely concealed glee. "This establishes malicious intent," she said. "They didn't fill in that pond because of mosquitoes. They did it to force you off your land." The HOA's legal team tried to suppress the emails, arguing they were privileged communication, but Judge Morrison allowed them. The criminal trial was scheduled first, and it started on a rainy Monday in October, about 5 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the case, and a lot of local ranchers and farmers had come to watch. They all understood that this wasn't just about my pond. It was about whether HOAs could push around agricultural property owners. District Attorney Scott Patterson prosecuted the case himself, which Rebecca said was unusual but showed how seriously they were taking it. Patricia sat at the defense table looking defiant, dressed in another designer suit. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented the county surveyor, who testified that the pond was entirely on my property. They presented the cement truck drivers, who testified that Patricia had assured them all permits were in order. They presented the permits themselves, showing that they didn't authorize work on my property. They presented photos and video of the incident. The defense tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed the pond was partly on HOA land, that it was an honest mistake, and that she'd been trying to protect Prairie Vista residents from mosquito-borne illnesses. But then Scott Patterson presented the emails. The jury's faces changed as they read Patricia's words about forcing me out, about eliminating my water source to make me sell. The defense attorney, a woman named Jennifer Cross, looked like she wanted to disappear. Dr. Chen testified about the damage to the aquifer and the cost of restoration. Dutch testified about my character and my operation. Rebecca testified as an expert on agricultural law, explaining why access to water was essential for livestock operations. The prosecution rested, and the defense called only 2 witnesses: a different surveyor who claimed the boundary was unclear, and Patricia herself. That was a mistake. Patricia's testimony was defensive and contradictory. She claimed she'd been acting on advice from the HOA's previous attorney, but couldn't produce any documentation of that advice. She insisted the mosquito problem was real, but admitted she'd never actually tested the water or documented mosquito populations. She denied that the emails meant what they clearly said. Scott Patterson destroyed her on cross-examination. "Ms. Hendricks, in your email dated May 10th, you wrote, 'If we eliminate the water source, he'll have to sell.' Is that correct?" "That was taken out of context. It's a yes or no question. Did you write those words?" "Yes, and when you wrote eliminate the water source, you were referring to Mr. Vaughn's stock pond." "I was brainstorming ideas. Yes or no, please." "Yes." "And when you wrote he'll have to sell, you meant you wanted Mr. Vaughn to sell his property?" Patricia hesitated. "The HOA was interested in potential expansion. So you decided to destroy his water supply to force him to sell. That's not what happened." "But that's what you wrote in the email, 3 weeks before you filled his pond with concrete." The jury convicted Patricia on all counts after deliberating for less than 4 hours. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though the judge suspended all but 90 days if she paid full restitution. She was also fined $50,000 and ordered to pay my legal fees for the criminal case. Patricia cried as the sentence was read, but I felt no sympathy. She tried to destroy my livelihood over a property dispute. She'd earned every consequence. The civil trial began 2 weeks later. This time, we weren't just suing Patricia but the entire HOA board and the organization itself. 8 people total, all of whom had voted to approve the pond filling project. The civil trial was longer and more complex. Rebecca had to prove not just that they'd destroyed my property, but the full extent of the damages. We presented Dr. Chen's restoration estimate. We presented my water hauling costs, which had reached nearly $30,000 by this point. We presented evidence of my stress and emotional distress. Most importantly, Rebecca argued for punitive damages. "The defendants didn't just make a mistake," she told the jury. "They engaged in a calculated campaign to force Mr. Vaughn off his land. They destroyed a natural spring that had been there for centuries, disrupted an aquifer system, and endangered his livestock. They need to be punished severely enough that no HOA will ever think about doing this again." The HOA's defense was that they'd been relying on advice from their management company and their attorney. They presented themselves as well-meaning volunteers who'd been misled. They argued that Patricia had acted beyond her authority and they shouldn't be held responsible for her actions. But Rebecca had the board meeting minutes. Every board member had voted in favor of the project. Several had even added comments supporting it. One board member had written in an email, "About time we did something about that eyesore of a ranch." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, They awarded me actual damages of $350,000 for pond restoration and water costs. Then they awarded punitive damages of $2 million to be paid by the HOA and the individual board members jointly. The HOA's attorney looked stricken. Patricia started crying again. Several of the board members looked like they might faint, but Rebecca just squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "We won." The aftermath took months to sort out. The HOA tried to appeal, but Judge Morrison's rulings were solid and the appeals court upheld everything. The HOA's insurance company paid most of the judgment, but several board members had to pay out of pocket. Patricia filed for bankruptcy. More importantly, the restoration work began. A specialized excavation company spent 6 weeks carefully removing the concrete from my pond. Dr. Chen supervised the entire process, ensuring the spring outlet wasn't damaged further. We all held our breath when they finished, waiting to see if the water would return. It took 3 days, but slowly, surely, water began seeping back into the pond. The spring hadn't been destroyed, just blocked. Within 2 weeks, the pond had refilled to about 70% of its original level. Dr. Chen was cautiously optimistic that it would eventually return to full capacity. My cattle, who'd been drinking from the emergency troughs for months, cautiously approached the pond one morning, sniffing the water. Then they drank, and I felt something in my chest unclench. It wasn't exactly the same as before. The concrete removal had changed the pond's shape somewhat and some of the vegetation was gone. But it was close. Close enough. Dutch came by the day the pond refilled and we stood there together, not saying much. Just watching the water reflect the Oklahoma sky. "Your granddad would be proud," Dutch finally said. "Not many men would have fought that hard." "Didn't really have a choice," I replied. "Sure you did. You could have taken a settlement, moved on, started over somewhere else. You chose to stand your ground." Maybe he was right. I'd certainly been tempted to give up more than once during those long months of legal battles. The stress had been enormous, the uncertainty crushing. There were nights I lay awake wondering if it was all worth it. But standing there watching my cattle drink from the restored pond, I knew it had been. This land was my heritage, my livelihood, my home. No HOA had the right to take that away. The legal victory had ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Within weeks, I was contacted by 3 other ranchers in Oklahoma who were dealing with HOA harassment. Rebecca took on 2 of their cases. The local news ran a story about the case, and suddenly, everyone was talking about HOA overreach and property rights. The Oklahoma legislature even introduced a bill to clarify HOA boundaries and limit their authority over adjacent properties. It was called the Livestock Water Protection Act, though everyone referred to it informally as Connor's Law. The bill passed 8 months after my case concluded. Patricia served her 90 days in county jail. I never saw her again after the sentencing. Rumor was she and her husband moved to Arizona. The HOA got a new board, and to their credit, they approached me about 6 months after everything was settled. The new president was a reasonable guy named Tom Fletcher, who apologized profusely for what had happened. "We're trying to rebuild trust with the community," he said. "I know we can't undo what was done, but I want you to know the new board is committed to respecting property boundaries and working cooperatively with all our neighbors." I appreciated the gesture, though I made it clear I'd be watching them carefully. Trust, once broken, takes a long time to rebuild. The financial settlement let me make improvements to my ranch I'd been putting off for years. I upgraded my fencing, built a new barn, and even bought a few more head of cattle. The ranch was more profitable than it had ever been. But more than the money, more than the improvements, What mattered was the principle. I'd stood up to people who thought they could push me around, who thought my rights didn't matter. I'd fought back and I'd won. About a year after the pond was restored, I was working on repairing a fence when I noticed someone walking up my driveway. It was a young woman, maybe late 20s, with a notebook in her hand. She introduced herself as Felicity Peters, a reporter working on a piece about HOA conflicts in rural areas. "Mr. Vaughn, your case has become kind of famous in property rights circles," she said. "Would you be willing to talk about your experience?" I considered saying no. I'd had my fill of attention. But then I thought about those other ranchers who'd reached out, about the people still fighting their own battles with overreaching HOAs. "Sure," I said. "Come on up to the house. I'll make some coffee." We talked for over 2 hours. I told her everything, from that first morning when I'd woken to the sound of cement mixers to the final restoration of the pond. She took notes carefully, asking thoughtful questions. "What would you say to other people facing similar situations?" she asked finally. I thought about that. "Don't give up. I know it's hard, I know it's expensive and stressful, and there are times you want to just walk away. But your property rights matter. Your livelihood matters. Find a good attorney, document everything, and stand your ground. The law is on your side if you're willing to fight for it." The article came out a month later in a national agricultural magazine. I got letters from people all over the country, farmers and ranchers who were dealing with their own HOA problems. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering advice and encouragement. Rebecca's practice grew significantly after the case. She became known as the go-to attorney for agricultural property disputes, especially involving HOAs. She hired 2 associate attorneys just to handle the caseload. "You know this is all your fault," she joked one day when she stopped by to check on the pond and go over some final paperwork. "I used to have a nice quiet practice. Now I'm drowning in HOA cases." "Sorry about that," I said. "Not sorry at all. Don't be. This is the most satisfying work I've ever done. These cases matter. People's livelihoods are at stake." She was right. Every case she won set precedent, made it a little harder for HOAs to bully property owners, protected people's rights. What had started as my personal fight had become something bigger. The pond continued to recover. By the second spring after restoration, it was back to about 90% of its original capacity. Native plants had regrown around the edges. Fish had somehow found their way back. Wildlife returned. It would never be exactly what it had been before, but it was close enough to function as it always had. My cattle thrived. The goats multiplied. The ranch prospered. Dutch still came by regularly, though now it was just for coffee and conversation rather than emergency water delivery. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. But I never forgot the lesson of those months. Property rights aren't automatic. They have to be defended. Organizations with money and lawyers will try to take what's yours if they think they can get away with it. The only thing that stops them is people willing to fight back. I kept a framed photo in my living room, taken the morning the pond was restored. It showed the water just beginning to seep back in, that first precious trickle that meant the spring still lived. Whenever I looked at it, I remembered why I'd fought so hard. That land was mine. That pond was mine. No HOA Karen could take it away. Several of the HOA board members who'd been hit with personal liability sold their homes in Prairie Vista and moved away. The development struggled with the financial impact of the judgment. Property values dropped when word got around about what had happened. Some people didn't want to live in a community that had destroyed a neighbor's livelihood. The new HOA board worked hard to rebuild the community's reputation. They established clear policies about respecting property boundaries and ended all harassment of neighboring property owners. Tom Fletcher proved to be a fair and reasonable president, and gradually things improved. I never became friends with anyone from Prairie Vista, but we reached a kind of wary coexistence. They stayed on their property, I stayed on mine, and everyone was better off for it. Rebecca invited me to speak at a cattlemen's association meeting about 3 years after the incident. I was nervous. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But she convinced me it was important for people to hear the story directly. The room was packed, standing room only. Ranchers and farmers from all over Oklahoma and even neighboring states had come to hear about the case. I told them everything, trying to be honest about how hard it had been, how many times I'd wanted to give up, but also about the importance of standing firm. The thing is, I said toward the end, they were counting on me giving up. That was their whole strategy. Make it expensive, make it stressful, make it take forever, and eventually I'd just sell the land and go away. But this land is my heritage. It's been in my family for generations. I wasn't about to let some HOA Karen take it away just because she wanted to expand her development. The room erupted in applause. Afterward, dozens of people came up to shake my hand, to share their own stories of HOA conflicts, to thank me for fighting. It was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. Dutch was there too, beaming with pride like I was his own son. "You did good, Connor," he said. "Real good." Life moved on. The seasons turned. The cattle were driven to market and new calves were born. The goats caused their usual mischief. The pond froze in winter and thawed in spring. The ranch kept running as it had for generations, as I hoped it would for generations more. I dated a veterinarian named Sarah for a while. She appreciated the ranch life, understood the demands and rewards of working with livestock. It didn't work out long term, but we parted as friends. Maybe someday I'd find the right person to share this land with, or maybe I wouldn't. Either way, I had the ranch, and that was enough. The Prairie Vista development eventually changed hands. The original development company went bankrupt after several other lawsuits emerged related to their business practices. A new company bought the properties and rebranded the community. They approached me early on, making it clear they wanted nothing but good relations with neighboring property owners. "We heard about what happened with the previous HOA," the new community manager said. "That's not how we do business. Your property is yours, our property is ours, and we respect that boundary." I appreciated that, though I kept my guard up. Trust, but verify, as the saying goes. Years passed. The case became something I thought about less often, though I never forgot it entirely. The photo of the restored pond stayed on my living room wall. Rebecca and I stayed in touch, occasional phone calls and updates on various cases. Dutch got older but still insisted on helping with the cattle drives every fall. The Livestock Water Protection Act that had been inspired by my case was working. Several attempts by HOAs to interfere with agricultural operations were shut down quickly because of the new law. Property owners had clear legal protection, and HOAs knew they'd face serious consequences if they overstepped. I'd become something of an accidental activist in the property rights community, though that wasn't a role I'd ever sought. But when people called asking for advice, I gave it. When reporters wanted to write about HOA overreach, I talked to them. When legislators considered laws that would protect property owners, I testified, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. And the more people who understood their rights and were willing to defend them, the harder it would be for organizations to abuse their power. The ranch became more than just my livelihood. It became a symbol, proof that individuals could stand up to powerful organizations and win. People would sometimes drive by, slow down to look at the pond, and I'd know they were thinking about the story. Some would stop and ask if they could take pictures. I always said yes. On the 5th anniversary of the pond's restoration, Rebecca organized a small celebration. She invited everyone who'd been involved in the case. Dutch, Dr. Chen, some of the other ranchers who'd supported me, even District Attorney Patterson. We stood around the pond, now fully recovered and thriving, and Rebecca made a toast. To Connor Vaughn, who reminded us all that property rights matter, that individuals can defeat powerful organizations, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma sun. These people had stood by me during the hardest fight of my life. They'd believed in me when I'd barely believed in myself. They'd helped me save not just my pond, but my entire way of life. "Thank you," I said simply. "All of you. I couldn't have done this without you." Dutch clapped me on the shoulder. "You'd have found a way. You're a Vaughn, too stubborn to quit." Maybe he was right. Maybe that stubborn streak that had driven my grandfather to build this ranch from nothing was the same trait that had kept me fighting when any reasonable person would have given up. Heritage isn't just about land. It's about character, about the determination to protect what's yours. The pond reflected the blue sky, clear and clean and full of life. My cattle grazed peacefully nearby, never knowing how close they'd come to losing their water source. The ranch would continue as it had for generations, and if anyone ever tried to threaten it again, I'd be ready. Because I'd learned an important lesson during those months of fighting. You can't back down from bullies, whether they're playground tyrants or HOA board members with clipboards and concrete trucks. You stand your ground, you fight for what's right, and eventually, justice prevails. The sun was setting over my 40 acres, painting everything gold and orange. My land, my pond, my cattle, my life. All of it nearly destroyed by one woman's ambition and an HOA board's overreach. All of it saved by determination, good legal help, and the simple refusal to give up what was mine. I stood there for a long time after everyone else had left, just watching the water and the cattle and the endless Oklahoma sky. This was home. This was legacy. This was worth fighting for, and I'd do it all again if I had to.